Hello, folks, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 2 of Modular Curiosity. In this episode, we will be looking at the Meta Modulator by Audible Instruments, which in the real world is warps by Mutable Instruments. This strange little module is not intuitive. Boy, you look at it and you have no idea what it does just from visually looking at it. For one thing, it has this great big knob, which makes you want to just twist it. And yet you tend not to. You tend not to actually twist this. You tend to use the timbre knob more because this is changing between different algorithms. Not only that, but the algorithms sort of make sense. They're sort of connected over on here. And then we go into a completely different set of modulations over on this side. So let's take a look at what this thing does. Okay, in that opening segment, I was playing a little keyboard. I was trying to play a little keyboard. And what I did is I had two sounds. Okay, so what I have here is a pretty simple traditional patch. It's basically a pulse wave. And just like the last episode, I put my slew limiter here. That gives me my slide. I don't think I have a filter on that one at all. Also, I got smart and started looking into the MIDI 1 and realizing that in the last episode, I used the MIDI CC to grab my mod wheel and to have that continuous controller. Well, it turns out that the MIDI 1 has a mod wheel output, and we're going to be using that a lot. It also has, let's see, this is the pitch wheel. So I move my pitch wheel, and what I'm doing is I'm taking the control voltage and the pitch wheel and multing together and put it here to the slew limiter, which goes to my voltage per octave input. And the reason I put it through the dual attenuator is because from high to low, I set it to an octave, but it actually goes 5 volts plus and minus. So here's the actual range. And that's not really useful. So I decided to go to an octave. There we go. I'm using the velocity of my keyboard to a VCA to adjust the volume, so I'm getting a little bit more response to my keyboard. So if I play softly, and as I play harder, so I'm finding that, wow, there's a whole bunch of stuff in here I never even use. Now the retrigger, start, stop, clocks, I haven't even gotten into that. I'm going to have to look into that. Aftertouch, my keyboard doesn't have aftertouch. So that would be useful, but I can't use it here. All right, that's the first sound. The second sound is 2 VCOs with a sawtooth wave, slightly actually no, let's see, it looks like, yeah, they're a fifth apart. Plus I have a filter, and that one sounds like this. And that's actually too much vibrato, so I must have brought the other vibrato out. Now if I brought this down to unison, but you remember in the last episode, we realized that if we just take this this tuning knob and push it all the way to the right, we get it exactly a fifth. And so that's what I've done. I also have a VCR or an ADSR going to a VCA to control the attack and release of the volume. And I have another one going to the filter, and that's how you get that wow, 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 wow sound. Pretty cool sound. But notice I didn't click buttons over here to go from one sound to the other sound. Okay, that's where the first algorithm of the metamodulator comes in. Because the first algorithm of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of them is crossfading, or actually a crossfade. So what I have is I have voice 1 coming into input 1. And you know what? I'm going to take this, I'm just going to stick it over there. It's not going to do anything. I'm just going to hold on to that cable so I don't lose it. And voice 2 comes into input number 2. And I have input volumes on both of those. So here's voice number 1. But how do I get to voice number 2? Well, the timbre knob does a crossfade. And if that's too loud, I can bring the volume down. So when I crossfade, I can also crossfade volumes. And what I did is I took my mod wheel and I decided to adjust the timbre using the modulation wheel of my keyboard. Pretty cool. Okay, the second algorithm is cross-folding. And what this does is it does a wave folding action between the two. Now, that doesn't really make sense. How do we explain that? Well, first of all, let's listen to what the sound is. There we go. So now we can see that is definitely a pulse wave. There we go. Okay, so we can start seeing how those square waves are being mutilated. They're being crossfaded with this other sound. Because there's the second sound. There's the first sound and the second. So the cross folding is going to take the second sound and use those up and down modulations, those up and down pitches, to take this one and fold the top half of the waveform down and make a more complex waveform. Wow, what an interesting thing to do. And of course, this algorithm knob has a control voltage input. So I could actually change my algorithm using the mod wheel. Boy, there's an interesting wave folding. But instead, I'm going to use the timbre knob because that seems to be where most of the variation is. Okay, third, fourth, and fifth are all ring modulators. And for this one, I'm actually going to pull that second form out. Okay, what I've done is I've moved my first voice. I moved it to the second input. And here's why. When we're in any of the ring modulation modes, what happens is that a ring modulator takes two waves, and think of them as having two different pitches. One of them might be 200 cycles per second. The other might be 300. Okay, so what comes out the other end is the sum, so that would be a 500, and the difference, which would be 100. Right? 300 minus 200 is 100. 300 plus 200 is 500. So you get two waveforms that kind of split, kind of do very strange things. But I need that second waveform. I need that second wave to add and subtract. So that's what this internal oscillator is. If I have no internal oscillator, I'm hitting the keys, I don't hear much. I mean, I hear my initial sound, but not much there. However, if I use the internal oscillator, hear that? In fact, I can put an output here, and you can actually hear that internal oscillator. Okay, so there's our internal pitch. And we can change the waveform. That's no waveform at all. That's internal oscillator on. And the auxiliary will give us just the internal oscillator. Now I'm going to move over here and have the ring modulated between my signal and that internal oscillator. What a strange sound. And what's interesting is if you play a scale, you don't really hear that much of a scalar sort of note. I mean, you can hear it in the background, but boy, where are those other harmonies coming from? Now, what does the timbre knob do here? Well, it changes the waveform of the internal oscillator. Now remember, I said clicking this will also change the waveform. So let's go look at the manual. Okay, so when it's off, there is no internal oscillator. When it's green, we're having a sine wave, which if we turn the timbre knob to the right, is turning it in more of a sawtooth wave. If we're in yellow, it's a triangle wave moving more towards pulse wave. And if it's red, it's a sawtooth, just like that, going into a really complex wave-folded sort of output. So we have lots of options of how to change our carrier so that the modulator, which is what we're playing, gets modified in different ways. Let's play with that. Okay, so let's go from the sine wave Oh, and by the way, hear that? Okay, so if I play the same note as that, my pluses and minuses are going to tend to be consonant. But what if I play something that's off from that note? I get really strange beat rates and really complex, weird waveforms. So let's hear what it sounds like if I play a C, since I have this tuned to a C. And I change it from sine wave to sawtooth wave. We get a pretty subtle difference. But now what if I play, say, a major third above? We get a little more effect. What if I play a minor second above, which will be really dissonant? And we can try things like the triangle wave. Or the sawtooth into complex waveform. So we get some really interesting little modulations here. And yet we're really only using one of the ring modulation modes. This is a diode ring modulator. And this one actually says the carrier and modulator are crudely multiplied rather than added, using a digital model of a diode ring modulator. If we go to this algorithm, we have a digital ring modulator, which is a little simpler, as it says, simpler and less crude. But I love the sound. How weird is that? And as we play with the timbre and change the waveform, how bizarre is this? And the third one is a digital ring modulator. Really strange. Now, I haven't figured out why I'm getting that internal oscillator coming through in these modes. I'm going to have to try to figure that out and see if there's some way to clean that up. I bet that what I need to do is right now I have my ADSR and my VCA going to my oscillator, or coming from the oscillator there. So I'm turning it on and off before I get to the meta modulator. What I probably need to do is turn it off afterwards. So let's do that. There we go. And now it's clean. See, it wouldn't be modular curiosity if I didn't make a couple mistakes and have to fix them in the middle of the episode. Let's see, I'm going to drop the tensions a little bit just so I can see that knob. Now, what happens over here? We didn't talk about that. We talked about the diode ring modulation, the digital ring modulation. This is an XOR modulation. Okay, imagine that we're converting analog signals into digital. That's going to be ones and zeros. And this is also converted into digital, which is ones and zeros. So it gives you this really strange combination, which in computer programming is actually quite useful, but in audio engineering, it just makes really cool, interesting sounds. So this is converting both signals, the carrier and the modulator, to digital, and then using an XOR on them to create even more interesting sounds. And again, if I play the note which is in tune to the oscillator, it's pretty interesting. I get some fairly consonant sounds. Even as I turn the timbre wheel with my modulation wheel on the keyboard. But the moment I go away from that, say a minor second, thirds, flat seventh, fifth. Fifth is not bad. Sixth, yeah, how about a minor third? Tritones. How bizarre. You can really get some interesting sounds. Really bizarre stuff. How about FF? What looks like double forte. It's not. It's probably a double integration symbol. This is comparison and rectification. So this is just a little bizarre, as is everything in this module. Let me read what the manual says. It says a handful of signals are synthesized through comparison operations, such as replace the negative portion of the carrier signal by the modulator. If the absolute value of the carrier is greater than the absolute value of the modulator, output the modulator, else the carrier. What the heck does that mean? Okay. Basically, it's taking the two waveforms and it's doing kind of a max. As you're looking at the wave shape, it's doing a maximum of the two shapes. So let's see what the output looks like. Put it in here. so here's one. Here's the interior, which is much higher. Now, as I change my modulation wheel, which is moving this timbre, we are mixing how much of that first and how much of the second. But the mix is not just a crossfade. It's flipping the bottom half of this waveform. There we go. It's flipping the bottom half of this up. So it's doing wave folding and taking whichever of the two waves is higher, flip it. And we can change waveforms here with our internal oscillator and get different effects. Wow, they're all just... Oh, there's a sweet spot. One of the things that may make this a little difficult to comprehend what the use of this module is the fact that I'm playing this on a keyboard. If you were to use a sequencer with really short, sharp pitches, ring modulation tends to create bell sounds and clanging sounds, and you can kind of hear that. Let's go to, say, this modulation. And let's come back and change our ADSR. And why don't we turn some of that reverb down? So I have a very short attack, a pretty quick decay to a low sustain. And I'm going to play kind of a dissonant interval, a major second above the carrier tone. You can hear how it becomes a much more percussive, which in percussive sounds, you might be able to get some really cool stuff, particularly down in the bass range. See, that really sounds like something is hitting a plate of steel. Now, what if we change this and go way low? See, by changing the carrier, we can get all sorts of different sounds. That's kind of one of the typical uses of a ring modulator. Okay, I'm going to have a quick assignment for you here. I want you to go to YouTube, and I want you to check out Billy Cobham's Spectrum album. And go to about 350 in, and I hope I'm not going to get yelled at by YouTube for doing this, but check out the keyboard sound on Jan Hammer's solo. This is using a ring modulator. You can really hear the multiplication to division of the sounds. That is a very typical use of the ring modulator. So those are the ring modulator modes. That brings us to these last three. What is that? Okay. It's still a case of having a carrier and something which modulates it, but it's a completely different concept than having an oscillator as the carrier and your keyboard as the modulator. These are vocoders. And what a vocoder is that your keyboard sound is the input, and the modulator, which will go here, is a microphone. That's right. So let's set that up. Okay, folks, what I've done here so that I could talk and not use my own microphone but I still need a voice or something as a modulator. I've loaded a voice of a person just counting from 0 to 12 into the player. So I just have a waveform with the output.
0, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Now, as he's talking, that voice, which I right now have left and right going to mult, so it's coming out in mono. I'm just using both sides. That's all I'm doing here. That is the modulation. And over here, we are using our vocoder. Now, as I play with the vocoder, move it between particularly these two. I'll tell you what the third one does in a moment. And with the timbre, you'll hear that right now you can't hear anything because my keyboard voice that comes through isn't going to play until we have something modulating. So let's go ahead. I'm going to turn this way down so you can hear what he's saying.
5, 6, 7, 8.
But I also
9,
want you to hear how it modulates
10,
the sound.
11, 12, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Now I'm going to shut off
0,
his voice entirely.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Hear that? Now, as we play with the timbre, we're adjusting the level of modulation, and right around here we can actually hear it pretty clearly. Or we can lower the modulation, or we can give a lot of modulation, which actually makes it a little hard to understand, but it does create some interesting waveforms. Now, as we move from here to here, the delay of that modulation gets longer. Now, why would we need that? Well, it may not make sense until we talk about what that does. What it does is, as we turn all the way to the snowflake or freeze, we are freezing the modulation that comes from our voice or from whatever input, so that our carrier, it freezes at whatever waveform that voice or that input has modulated it to. Let's see if I can hit it. There, I caught it on 2. Let's see if I can catch it on 6. Oh, how about 9? There, I caught it in the R of 3 and froze it. 11, 12, 0. Let's try to catch it on 3. Now, I have a feeling that what's actually going to be useful 1, 2,
is to just randomly
3,
catch it at any point
4.
in that waveform to freeze the sound into whatever you're trying to play. So let's go to a long delay so we can play notes even when he's not speaking. And we'll just randomly freeze it.
7, 8, 9, 10.
Isn't that cool?
5, 6.
Okay, folks, as you can see, there is so much to this module. I mean, this has become a long video, and yet I still feel like I haven't really touched on what it could do. How about doing things like have a clock with a sample and hold feeding the algorithm so that it randomly jumps through the ring modulator and wave folder and cross-folding modulations, while also using a sample and hold to change the pitch. You can get some really interesting, weird filter combinations. Not only that, but all these ring modulator things are creating very weird, complex waveforms. And as you remember from episode 1, what modules love complex waveforms? Filters love complex waveforms. So what if we added a filter after the meta modulator, created some really interesting, strange sounds, and then filter them to take that wildness and tame it a little bit? There could be a lot of cool things. What if we took the vocoder and we're writing some sort of funky tune and we wanted to have a lead where the voice actually, your synthesizer voice actually speaks to you? Well, we have a possibility, we have a way to do that. So, wow, how can I give you an assignment with so many things that this meta modulator can do? I would say go play with it, have fun with it, see what interesting things you can do. Check out DivKid's video where he goes through every algorithm in even more detail. And also, I wanted to say that little musical piece I put at the front of this video, I'm starting another playlist on this channel called Modular Curiosity Extras. And the first 2 videos I'm putting are the backup tracks for that. One is just the guitar and mellotron flutes. And the second one is the one I actually used, which was drums, guitar, and mellotron violins. And so I'm going to give you those backup tracks. So if you want to play with crossing between 2 voices or with your with anything and just play with a backup track for a while, I'm going to provide those. Okay. Hey, as always, like and subscribe because that does help me out a bit. And also, as always, stay curious. All right. Talk to you later.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.